Hi, good evening from Hong Kong. My name is Jennifer Creary. I'm a Claire Hollingworth Fellow at the FCC, and I'm also a journalist at the Financial Times. Thank you so much for joining us for our conversation about Trump, Bezos, and the Washington Post with Marty Barron, which I'm sure many of our audience today are very familiar with. But before I kick off, I want to invite all of you to check out our wall exhibition at the FCC. It's called This Sporting Life. It's by Ian McNichol, and that's on display until July the 31st. So I encourage you all to go check it out. It's really exciting stuff. And with that, it's my pleasure to welcome Marty Barron, who took the reins of the Washington Post in 2013 at a particularly difficult time when the paper was demoralized by buyouts and budget cuts. He also saw the expansion of its newsroom after the Post was bought by Amazon founder Jeff Bezos, who, as many of you know, recently returned to Earth after blasting off on his Blue Origin spacecraft. Marty was also at the helm when Donald Trump entered the political arena, and the Post adapted the motto, "Democracy dies in the darkness." So we look forward to discussing what it's like to lead a newsroom during Trump's tumultuous presidency, as well as the future of journalism in the US with Marty. So moderating today's talk is Keith Richburg, the president of the FCC and formerly of the Washington Post, now the director of the University of Hong Kong's Journalism and Media Studies Center. Please send any questions that you might have to the email address question@fcchk.org. That's question singular at fcchk.org. And with that, I will pass over to Keith, who will kick us off.
Well, great. Well, thank you very much for that, Jennifer. And we'll be back with you later, I think, if you have some audience questions. So audience members, if you do have questions, please send them in if you want them read in a really nice British accent. So thank you for being here, Marty. We really appreciate this. And I should say, full disclosure, I think we overlapped at the Washington Post by about 2 weeks. I think the first time I think the first time we actually met was for my going away party from the Washington Post.
I trust I wasn't responsible for your departure.
So. No. It was all set in motion before you got there. So we really appreciate your being here. And, before we get into the meat of what we want to talk about, I did want to just ask you about one sad topic, which is we're coming up soon on the third anniversary of the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, the Washington Post columnist, murdered in the Saudi embassy in Turkey. I just want to ask, we know the Biden administration has come out with this investigative report that's shown that the Mohammed bin Salman was involved. What do you think should be? Do you think justice will be done, or what do you think should be done now in that case?
Well, I mean, I think that people who are responsible for his assassination should be held accountable. Clearly, certain people have been identified, but not all of the people have been identified. Of course, MBS in Saudi Arabia denies involvement, and it's not going to be possible, probably, to put him through a trial. But I think everybody involved should be held accountable, and essentially, since MBS represents the country should be held accountable as well, because not to do so allows other countries to do exactly the same thing. And we're still learning additional information about that murder. We still haven't found his body, and which was chopped up and disposed of somewhere. And so, there has not been true accountability. And even those who were arrested and supposedly tried, although we had no access to those trials, we don't know quite what transpired. It's quite possible that they will go free as well. And we have yet to know what's going to be the outcome there.
Are you a little disappointed that the Biden administration hasn't taken a tougher line with the Saudi government on this?
Well, sure. I didn't expect much, frankly, because of the importance of Saudi Arabia to the United States. So, certainly I would have hoped for more, but I didn't expect very much.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's a really sad story, and all of us, all of us are we're thinking about it when it happened and thinking about it afterwards here. But let me ask you about you've been at the top of journalism for a lot of major stories. The contested 2000 election, 9/11. You were at the Boston, in charge of the Boston Globe. You helped lead the team, the Spotlight team that exposed the church abuse scandal. But then 2020 seems in a league of its own. You had a pandemic, you had the 2020 US presidential elections, and then you had the George Floyd murder that led to this kind of racial reckoning. I mean, was that what, just describe what that was like leading a newsroom when you had this kind of journalistic perfect storm going on? What was that really like?
Well, it was an extraordinarily difficult year. It's one that I'm incredibly proud of in many ways, because I think our staff really rose to the challenge. Everybody had to leave the office on March 10th. That's not something that we had to adapt to working remotely, which was not something that we had done prior to that. They were covering these extraordinary events, pandemic, which affected everybody everywhere in the world. And every beat that everybody worked on, and that was extraordinary. And then, of course, we had the racial justice protests, and I was very proud of the coverage of that. And then we had the challenge. The ultimate challenge, the ultimate assault on truth in the United States, which came with the election and the events that followed. And then an attack on a hallowed institution in the United States, the Capitol, on January 6th. So it was an exhausting year, I think, for everybody. It elevated tensions, I think, certainly within society, but also within our newsrooms. Our newsrooms are not insulated from what's happening in the broader world. In many ways, we reflect that. That was certainly true with the racial justice protests. We had a racial reckoning within our own newsroom, and understandably, and also just the pressures that came with a pandemic and how that affected people's personal lives. And then I think, the challenge to democracy, the challenge to the assault on, not just on democratic institutions in the United States, but an assault on objective reality, frankly, in the United States. And that's a shock, I think, for all of us who believe that there is such a thing as objective fact and objective reality, and that we're committed to reporting that, and then not to see the public accept that as reality is a shock to any journalist. I mean, how can you look at witness the events of January 6th, for example, and then claim that this was Antifa, or claim that these were, loving people, or as the former president says, that they were hugging and kissing the police. Didn't look that way to me. Didn't look that way to the Capitol Police. It's not exactly what members of Congress were running away from. And so how is it that people can believe this nonsense? And that's a new reality for us to grapple with. And so there were just enormous challenges on every front, I think, last year, a year unlike any of us has ever confronted.
Yeah, and I want to get back to January 6th, but let me ask you first, do you believe Trump actually succeeded in sowing this distrust among the public with the news media? And I say that because even over here in Asia, we hear this phrase, fake news, being repeated by dictators and autocrats everywhere. I mean, did Trump actually get away with that?
Yeah, I think he did. He said recently that one of his greatest achievements was exposing corruption in the media. But he didn't expose corruption in the media, but he did have success, if he can count it as an achievement, at sowing distrust in the media. I mean, look, that distrust existed prior to his arrival on the scene. Approval and trust in the media was declining well before that, but he accelerated it, he reinforced it, he deepened the distrust, and he made it seem as if there is no objective reality. There is no objective fact. It's just a matter of who you're politically aligned with, what your own personal opinions are, that it's all just a matter of opinion. Mm-hmm. And so, so in that way, I think that he, sadly, he accomplished what he wanted to accomplish, and disturbingly so. And we're going to be dealing with that for decades to come. How we get out of that, I don't exactly know at the moment, and I may never know. But that is what I don't consider an accomplishment, but one can argue that he succeeded at what he endeavored to do.
Yeah, and you actually took the next question out of my mouth. I was going to ask you, what can the media do to try to reverse this, or at least get back to a position where people believe what they read?
Well, I mean, it's not just a problem for the press; it's a problem for society as a whole. We didn't create it. We can't solve it alone. I think there's got to be a lot that goes on. I mean, I think media literacy is really important, and it needs to be taught. Whether it will be on a grand scale in the United States and other parts of the world, I don't know. That's a huge challenge. I do try to keep the long view in mind, and that is, even at the time of Watergate, the press was pilloried for being partisan actor, for essentially spreading fake news, although the term wasn't commonly used at the time. And approval ratings for the press really sunk initially until all that reporting was validated. And our reporting is being validated day after day. It will take time for that to sink in with the American public. And then I think there's some things that the press can do and should do. And I think that we need to show more of our work. We need to show more of the evidence that we're relying upon. A lot of the work around January 6th has been effective, I think, in showing the video, doing interactive graphics, doing animated reconstructions of what occurred, providing the evidence, showing people the court documents, laying all that out, showing what happened after the election, looking at the court rulings, quoting from the language of judges, even those who were appointed by Trump. All of that, we have to actually show the evidence. I think that's really important for us to do. And then I think we have to, to be honest, I think we have to look at our own behavior. I think that our job has to be, at least in the mainstream press, has to be that of people who tell people the facts, unflinchingly. Just tell them what we found, and not be shy about that. Tell it to them directly. But I don't think that we should be engaging in opinion mongering of our own as reporters. People on the news side, let the people on the opinion side do that. And I think we have to be very careful about that it doesn't look like we are what Steve Bannon called us at the beginning of the Trump administration, the opposition party. If we behave like the opposition party, we will be regarded as the opposition party, and what we report will be dismissed as simply the work of the opposition party.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Let me ask you, I want to get up to January 6th, but let's start earlier. Let's go back in history a little bit. I want to start with the 2016 election.
Yeah.
It's great to be a Monday morning quarterback. It's great to look back. If you could look back at the 2016 election, do you think the press writ large and also the Post did everything they could do to really cover that election and let people know what Trump was about, and to kind of expose? I mean, you had this candidate who was just kind of out of the box there. And a lot of people, I asked the question because a lot of people say the media helped create this guy.
Yeah, sure. Look, I don't like that phrase, the media, because the media covers a lot of territory. And we're not all the same, as you all know. And everybody does their own thing. I'm proud of what the Post did in terms of covering the election, in terms of reporting on Donald Trump, his career, his life. We did a long series of stories that went very deep on him. We actually, we did an entire book on him called Trump Revealed. We assigned, much to the criticism of the Trump campaign, 20 additional reporters to do that book and to dive into every aspect of his life that we could find at the time. I mean, we've learned a bit more since then, but you always learn more over time. And so I think that, I just reread that book and called Trump Revealed, and it's amazingly revelatory. It is revelatory about who he is and what his character is like. And I think it was, I think if people go back and look at that, they'll say, wow, the Post did a really good job on that. So, and we did that in our news coverage as well as part of the series that we were doing. I think there were a couple of failures along the way on the part of the media writ large. And I think there were certain, I think, for example, for CNN simply to run his rallies from beginning to end without interruption, without an intermediary letting him say whatever he wanted, was free advertising and very expensive advertising, by the way. And that was really problematic. And I think CNN probably recognizes that today and has for the last number of years. I think that, the failure, our failure, let's say, if at the Post, was really in anticipating a candidate like Donald Trump. So prior to 2016, say going back into 2013, 2012, go back a little bit in time, is sort of better understanding the nature of the American public and what those sentiments that led to a candidate like Donald Trump. We took him seriously right from the very beginning. We were determined to. You could see immediately after he descended that escalator in Trump Tower and was calling Mexican immigrants rapists. As abhorrent as that was, he immediately became the top polling candidate in the Republican Party, and remained so throughout the campaign. And that was, you couldn't ignore that. You couldn't pretend. We didn't do like one particular site did, is like relegate him to the entertainment section. That's just nonsense. And we treated him as a serious candidate because he was getting serious support. And so, but I think that, where we needed to do more was well before he became an announced candidate, is understanding the American public, not so much understanding Trump, but understanding the American public that led to a candidate like Donald Trump.
And if you then fast forward to he gets elected, fast forward to the inauguration, he claims he's got the largest crowd for any inauguration in history. And I believe the Post, among others, went out and just debunked that right away by showing photographs side by side of the Obama first inauguration and Trump's. I mean, did that set the stage for this kind of combat where Trump decided that, the Washington Post was the opposition? And did that set the stage for the Washington Post to say this guy's just a liar?
Well, the stage was set well before he took office. It was set during the campaign. He lied consistently during the campaign. We had serious confrontations with him during that campaign. You may recall that he actually banned our reporters from attending his rallies, and he began to attack our owner, Jeff Bezos, during the campaign, not when he took office. Although he did after he took office, but it became clear that, and certainly we assumed as much. It became clear that when he took office, that he wasn't going to be any different than he was as a candidate. This idea of being presidential, I mean, we had our own definition of presidential. He has his definition of being presidential. And I remember very distinctly when campaign aides met every year after election, although I don't know if it was done after this past campaign. At Harvard, there's a reconstruction of what happened during the campaign, and all the campaign managers from the primaries to the general election gather there and they talk about what happened. And I remember very distinctly Kellyanne Conway saying when she was confronted with the idea of him being presidential, she said, well, when he becomes president, what he does will be presidential. And that's their definition. If he's president, it's presidential. And so, yeah, I mean, I think the stage was set before that, but it was clear that he was going to wage this campaign against the press from the very beginning. And in fact, on his very first full day in office, that's when he went to the CIA. And instead of really talking about the sacrifices of intelligence agents, and he was in front of a memorial wall while he was there, he started talking about his base of support and how they probably supported him, and how all of you know that I'm at war with the media, and he was at war with the media. And his goal was to undermine confidence in what we did, so that people wouldn't believe what we reported.
Yeah, and I remember Kellyanne Conway used the phrase "alternative facts." There are facts, but there are alternative facts. I mean, when you have this amount of mendacity and lying coming out, at what point, you're the editor? I mean, at what point do you say it's okay to use the word lie in a story?
Yeah, well, that was big discussion, and I know that people obsess about that. Look, I mean, I think that it's not a mistake for media to be restrained until they can no longer be. I think that, as Dean Baquet of the New York Times has pointed out on numerous occasions, once you start using the word lie, everybody's focusing on the language you use rather than the falsehood itself. And then we become the issue, not the facts are not the issue. The other problem with Trump in particular, is that it's hard to know whether lie assumes that somebody has knowledge that what they're saying is not true. And with Trump, you never really know. Some of it is just plain delusion, and he may well believe what he's actually saying. And so, we felt at the beginning that we need to document that he knew that what he was saying was untrue before we use the word lie. Now people can criticize that, and they've made a big issue out of that. The reality is that had we used the word lie earlier or more frequently, does anybody seriously think that would have made much of a difference in terms of how the public actually responded? I don't think so. It hasn't made any difference since, and I doubt it would have made any difference before. The public was either aligned with him or they weren't. And whether we called it a lie or we called it a falsehood, the impact there would have been no difference in terms of impact. So.
And if you go to January 6th, I mean, from everything you knew from the campaign and then the presidency to the refusal to concede defeat, was that kind of inevitable in your mind that it was going to lead to that kind of violent confrontation?
Well, I didn't necessarily anticipate the violence per se, although I was certainly on guard for that, and a lot of us were. I did anticipate and did say that I did, excuse me, that I didn't think he was going to leave office, that there would be doubt as to whether he would actually leave the White House until probably the day of the inauguration. Because that's who he is, that's how he behaves. He doesn't believe he can be a loser. He's always fought the idea of being a loser. His father told him not to be a loser. And it was clear during the campaign that he was going to argue that if he lost the election, that it could not have been a legitimate loss. And so it became, and then his actions during the election night, particularly after Fox News called Arizona for Joe Biden, indicated that he was going to fight. And his comments on the night of the election certainly indicated that he was not going to accept the result. And when he was asked prior to the election whether he would agree to a peaceful transfer of power, he did not agree to a peaceful transfer of power. I mean, one of the things about Donald Trump is that for all his lies and falsehoods and what have you, he is often quite transparent about what he believes and what he is going to do. And in that instance, he was quite transparent that he was not going to accept the results of the election, that he was going to argue that it was illegitimate, and that he was probably going to fight it till the very end.
Do you think the polls got it wrong in 2016 and kind of missed in 2020 how much support he had? And also, do you think the polls got it wrong when they were predicting kind of sweeping Democratic gains in the House and the Senate?
Well, polling really, I mean, look, there was just a report out by the American Association of Public Opinion Research about polling in 2020, and it was pretty bad. And they had done a previous report on the failures of 2016. That was pretty bad. There's clearly something that needs to be addressed in public opinion polling. And I don't think that anybody really knows what exactly has gone wrong, but there's been sort of a fundamental shift, and that requires a different methodology, that requires a reevaluation of the methodology that's being used. And I trust that the public opinion professionals are going to do that. Their professional organization, which I just mentioned, APOR, has called for that, and they should do that. And we've talked about it among ourselves at the Washington Post. I mean, most states we did pretty well. There were a couple of states where we didn't do so well, and certainly they need to figure out why that is. Polling is really difficult these days for a wide range of reasons, but clearly polling is not seen its best days.
Yeah, because when I talk to my students, we talk about confirmation bias and we talk about all the problems. But when I read the Washington Post and the New York Times religiously during the campaign, the reporters were out there. They were in Ohio. They were in these kind of red states talking to Trump supporters. But I'm not quite sure whether that broke through how much support Trump actually did have. I think maybe that's why people were surprised. Is there something else that could have been done? I mean, or was there not enough time spent in those areas, or what do you think was going on?
Oh, I think our reporters in the field actually felt that there was a tremendous amount of support for Trump. I mean, I had told people, that when I was asked prior to the 2016 election about Trump's odds, I said I thought he had a 40 to 50% chance of winning, and people were astonished when I said that. And the reason that I said that was simply because one could see the enthusiasm for Trump. One could see the lack of enthusiasm for Hillary Clinton. One could look at what happened in the primaries where Hillary Clinton barely made it over the finish line against Bernie Sanders. Wasn't even a member of the Democratic Party. And clearly she was, not inspiring people. And there were huge divisions within the Democratic Party in 2016. So, we have a very polarized society. So I thought there was every chance that Trump could win. I mean, I think generally people thought that Hillary Clinton would pull it out, but I wasn't confident of that, and I think there are a lot of reporters in the field who weren't confident of it. I mean, look, this is the issue: is some people, say that you should rely on more quantitative data in evaluating these elections, and not rely strictly on anecdotal, because if you're a reporter out in the field, there are only so many people you can talk to, and there are only so many places you can go, and you're really getting an infinitesimal fraction of the public. And then there are other people who say, no, actually, to really take the measure of it, you need to look at more subjective factors. And the reality is we need both. And the reason we have elections is to find out who actually won. And that's why we don't decide who's a member of Congress or who's president of the United States based on what the polls show. Yeah. So because we know that the end result might be different.
Yeah. And can I ask, I mean, it may sound like an odd question, but was Trump in a way good for journalism? Because I read the Washington Post and the New York Times. It seems like it was a great newspaper war going on with great scoops coming out. And was Trump actually a good thing?
Well, I think that he certainly reminded people of the core purpose of journalism, the people in the profession of the core purpose of journalism. And I think he reminded a good portion of the American public of why they can't take journalism for granted. And it led to a large number of people actually subscribing digitally to news organizations when they would not have done so before, because they were concerned about what was happening in the country. So from a sense of a purpose and a sense of and a commercial sense, he had beneficial results. On the other hand, as we discussed before, he really undermined confidence in the media, and so now consumption of media is more polarized than it probably ever has been, and that's not a great result for us, because in order to have a democracy, you have to share a common set of facts, even if you don't share political views about how to resolve the problems in society. And we have a society now that can't even agree on the most basic facts. We can't even agree on what constitutes a fact, and that's a serious problem. It's a serious problem for journalism, but even beyond that, it's a serious problem for society and for democracy.
Sure. And what I know journalists hate to speculate, but and so I'm sorry to ask you to, but what's your gut tell you? Will Trump run again in 2024?
I don't know. You asked me about polling. We did our best to find out what the outcome would be. The worst part would be for me to sit here and just, based on nothing, speculate about what his intentions are. I don't know.
Sure. Yeah. But and just last question on Trump, I promise. But I actually wonder myself sometimes if the media is paying too much attention to him now. I mean, sort of like every time he gives a speech, every time there's a rally, it kind of becomes front page news. Every time he criticizes Biden. I mean, is the media paying too much attention to Trump?
Well, it's conundrum. I don't think it's always front page news, by the way. So the rallies have not been covered very extensively by, I mean, the Post will cover it, of course, but they haven't given it a lot of prominence. And even when I was there, we were not giving a lot of what he said post inauguration much attention, a huge amount of attention. You can't ignore him, however. I mean, notwithstanding, even though a lot of people, particularly Democrats, would like us to do so, the reality is that he controls the Republican Party. And how can you ignore the person who controls the Republican Party? And, I think you have to focus on the, statements and actions that have concrete results rather than just whatever he, whatever he might say on any particular day, because he could just say anything. And but if he's doing things that are going to have a real world impact, you do have to focus on that. You can't ignore what's happening in the other major party in the United States, and but you have to put it in proper context.
Yeah. And I want to turn to the Post itself, actually, for a moment here, because you took over, right before Jeff Bezos, the world's richest man, who just came back to Earth, bought the paper, and the Post, I got to say, it's been thriving. It was struggling financially before that. There were rounds of buyouts and cost cutting, but it's really been an amazing reinvention. And I guess the question is that the model that other papers could look for? Do we need to have a multi-billionaire owner who buys a newspaper and then leaves it alone, or is that unique to the situation with the Post and Jeff Bezos, you think?
Well, first of all, there are not enough multi-billionaire owners to take care of American journalism, and who are going to buy news organizations all around the country, or all around the world for that matter, because it's not just in the United States where news organizations are struggling. They're struggling essentially in every country around the world for one reason or another, and many of them similar reasons. And so that can't be the model. I think it can be a model to some degree, but not entirely, because the Post was in a unique situation. It's, I think, the reason that Jeff Bezos acquired the Post and saw opportunity in the Post, and that was that we had the opportunity to be a national and even international news organization. It's not true of every newspaper or news organization with a newspaper legacy in the United States. But for us, we were in the nation's capital. We had the name, the Washington Post, which is a name that can be leveraged to a national and international level. And we had a history and identity that was well established, and that had even sunk in with members of the American public who had never read the Washington Post before. Going back to Watergate, they had a sense of what the Post was, which was the idea of shining a light in dark corners, of holding government accountable, holding power accountable. And so that established our identity. Not every news organization has that. I do think that, there are some models there that need some aspects of the Post model that can be adopted. Number one is that you need to come up with a strategy that's actually going to work. The strategy, and you need to think unconventionally about what you're doing. And I think that every news organization needs to spend a lot of time really thinking through the strategy, and the strategy has to be fundamentally based on what will attract readers, not what will attract advertisers. And because the advertisers will have to follow. It's not that you ignore advertising, but catering to advertisers is really going to be the death knell of any news organization, because what advertisers like is not what readers like. And so you really have to focus on what can we do for readers. Secondly, it has to be digitally oriented. The future is not print. That's the past. It's not that we ignore print. It's that we have to figure out how does the digital dissemination of information change what we do? How does it change storytelling? And it does change storytelling in the same way that radio changed storytelling from print, and television changed storytelling from radio and print. The internet is not just the digital expression of our print stories. There are new ways to tell stories. And I think the greatest model of that is, again, is what a number of news organizations, the Post, the Times, others, were doing on January 6th is showing what happened in the Capitol through the by integrating all of the tools that we have, which is text, video, interactive graphics, animation, all of that, all of it working on mobile devices, and because that's where people are going to get information. So I think that's another aspect of it, and people in our profession need to understand that storytelling is simply going to change and needs to change, and that there are other things that we need to do that are annoyances for a lot of traditionalists, but are absolutely necessary in order to succeed with the dissemination of news through social media and through and with search engines, with the primary search engine, which is Google, and then it's Google News function as well. So we just have to do them. I don't care if people don't like them, but they have to be done. So I think that there are any number of examples there, any aspects of the Post model that can be adopted, but the idea of just a billionaire coming in and buying it, that's not it. And by the way, Bezos, it's not that he wasn't involved in the news coverage. He didn't get involved in dictating what we covered or how we covered it or critiquing our coverage, but he was involved in the business side of the news organization, on the technology side, and deeply involved, and that was really important.
Yeah, and he kind of encouraged the move into digital more, right, and the expansion into digital.
And I think the other aspect that needs to be mentioned is he talked at the beginning about providing us runway, and the translation of that is give things time. I mean, when I was at other news organizations, often all we could do is think in terms of the next quarter or maybe the next year, but to do what we need to do in this profession, we need to do the right things, but we need to give it time to work.
Okay, we've got a few audience questions from Jennifer, but before I turn it over, I do need to ask you now, are you on the list of astronauts to go up into the Blue Origin, or are you going to get up there in space or the edge of space?
No, some would say I'm a space cadet already, but no, I have no intention, zero. And nor do I have the money, by the way, to buy a seat. So
I'm sure he would give you a seat. I mean, come on.
Okay. It's okay. I'm happy to feed my seat to someone else.
Jennifer, you've got a few audience questions, all right?
Yeah, that's right. We have a question from Patrick Dransfield of Clearway Communications. Do you agree with historian Heather Cox Richardson in her analysis that Trump and the present Republican Party represents an existential threat to democracy in the US because at, quote, no point in American history has one of the two main parties literally rejected the rules of the game, end quote?
Well, I think there are certain elements of the Republican Party. I'm not going to say the entire party, but there are certain elements of the party that represent a threat to democracy because they're not accepting they won't even accept the results of a democratic election, one that's found to be legitimate, that has been tested in so many different ways. It's been investigated every which way, and if you can't accept that, then you represent a threat to democracy. And if you argue that people shouldn't participate, that you go about restricting people's participation in democracy, then that's anti-democratic, and so that represents a threat.
We also have a question from Christy Lou Stout of CNN, who's also a member of the FCC. From the big lie to vaccine misinformation, conspiracy theories are flourishing in the US and dividing the country. How did it come to this? And she's also got a second question. Tucker Carlson and Fox and the Republican politicians, what is their role in this torrent of misinformation out there?
Well, Fox's role is pretty big. They're spreading a lot of disinformation and misinformation, and they do that every night for hours on end. And that's really disturbing. A big reason why a lot of people are not getting vaccinated in the United States is because of what they hear on Fox News, because Fox News has sowed so many doubts about the efficacy of the vaccine, but also suggested that it's a danger, that something terrible could happen to you. Well, something like 150 million people in the United States have been vaccinated, and nothing terrible has happened to them. I happen to be one of them, and you know, I don't feel any different. You know, that's so. Yes, I do fault them for that. I think it's terrible, and I mean, we're seeing some signs of change at Fox News at the moment, but not with the primary hosts like Tucker Carlson and Laura Ingraham. In terms of conspiracy theories, look, I mean, I think what's happened in the United States is what's happened actually around the world. It's not unique to the United States, by the way, and that is it's the internet. I mean, and the internet has allowed sort of the emergence of all sorts of sites. They call themselves news sites, but in fact they're disinformation sites, and they spread conspiracy theories and falsehoods and lies and what have you, and people like to be affirmed in their pre-existing point of view. They want to be told that they're exactly right, and that's what's happening. Is that people are turning to sites that affirm their pre-existing view of the world, and they're told that they're exactly right. And so people are spreading various conspiracy theories, and because they have a huge distrust in mainstream media, they don't accept what we say, and they accept what these sites say. Even if they don't know who's behind the site, they don't know who's writing it, they don't know what their credentials are, they don't know anything about them. And none of that is transparent, and they believe that. And on those sites, they find other people who share their views, and then people say everybody I know thinks exactly the same. And so the internet allows that. The internet allows that to happen. And how we overcome that, honestly, as I said before, I don't really know.
Right, and we have another question from our audience, from Wayne Ma, who wants to ask you about the incident regarding Felicia Somnes and her suspension and ban from covering sexual assault at the Washington Post. Do you regret those decisions? What was the original thinking behind them? And what has the Post done to ensure such incidents don't happen again?
Well, I'm not going to get into her case specifically, but I don't have any regrets about. I don't have any regrets.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that. And let me just ask you a more general question, kind of pegging off that. I mean, how difficult is it to manage a newsroom when journalists are supposed to be objective, but everybody is out there on social media and, you know, making snarky comments on Twitter, and they're supposed to be building their brand? I mean, is there an inherent conflict there?
Well, look, I mean, I think that it's really important that we think of the institution. I think that, you know, we spend a tremendous amount of time trying to compose stories in the way that we think are appropriate. It's really difficult. The risk that you're going to do something wrong is really high. So collectively, we make decisions about the headlines that we publish, the way that stories are written, what the lead is, what follows after that, what the tone is, what the tenor is, the order of the subjects that we address in a story, the photos that we use, the placement on a page or on a website, all of that. We take enormous care with that. It is a real problem when anybody or everybody on your staff decides on their own that they're going to do whatever they want. Talk about the subject however they wish, using whatever language they wish, advancing any cause that they happen to believe in, and that becomes a representation of the institution. And then people focus on that, because why do those people have followers on Twitter, for example? They have followers because of their association with the institution. And so they're using the institution as a platform for personal self-expression. And many of them, by the way, happen to be people who, when they joined that institution, agreed to the standards that the institution said they had. And an institution has the right to set its own standards, and the standards for people who work there. And if people don't want to abide by them, then don't work there. That would be my answer to that. But when you spend a lot of time trying to get a story right, to do it right, and then any one person goes out there and says something that the public thinks is a representation of the institution, that is a real problem, because that removes control of our coverage from the people who are assigned to make those coverage decisions, and it gives equal weight to that one individual over the collective decision of the institution, which involved maybe dozens of people making decisions about what's the best way to do this coverage. And that is a serious problem. And in my estimation, I recognize people's desire for self-expression, but I also think it's important to think of what the institution is and what it should be, what it stands for. And if people don't believe in that, they don't believe in the principles of the institution, they don't believe in the standards of the institution, they don't believe in the principles, the standards, the practices of the institution, then they shouldn't work there. They should work somewhere else. There are many different types of media organizations. Not all of them need to be the same, but every one of those institutions has the right to determine for itself what its principles, standards, and practices should be, and what the principles, standards, and practices of its staff should be. And if you have no standards, then the public will recognize that you have no standards, and I think that's a real problem for any media institution.
Yeah, at the University of Hong Kong, I try to teach best practices journalism as I learned at the Washington Post, where we try to be, balanced. We try to get all sides in, et cetera. But, I do find a lot of younger journalists say that that's old fashioned, and that we can't have on the one hand, on the other hand journalism, because that's not serving the goal of truth. And they use the example, many use the example of climate change. And they say we shouldn't say on the one hand, people say climate change is a problem. On the other hand, these others say it's not a problem. I mean, give me some advice. What should I tell these young journalists who say that I'm old fashioned?
I don't believe in the term balance. I don't believe in the term neutrality. I don't believe in on the one hand, on the other hand, journalism. I do believe in the idea of objectivity as it was originally defined. And that was 100 years ago. Originally defined is that recognizing that we don't know everything when we go into a story, and that we need to keep an open mind, and we need to do a good job of asking questions and listening, and doing a thorough job of research. Once we've done all that, once we've determined what the facts are, once we've put them into proper context, once we feel that we've truly been thorough, then I think we have to tell people in a very direct, unflinching way what we've learned. If we've done the research and it points to certain facts, we can't just give 50% weight to that and 50% weight to people who say things that's completely counterfactual, which would apply to climate change and would apply to the election results. It's not a 50-50 thing. It's not a balanced thing. It's like, have we actually done our research? We've looked at everything. We've evaluated the evidence, but we didn't come in with just preconceptions, and we didn't do our so-called reporting just to reinforce what our own pre-existing views were, that we actually genuinely reported things out and listened to everybody and did a thorough job. Then we told people exactly what we found, and we didn't mince words. And look, somehow objectivity has become a bad word. But, when we talk about a judge, we ask a judge to be objective. We don't have a problem with using the word objective in the context of a judge looking at the evidence, or a jury looking at the evidence. We ask them to be objective, which means look at all the evidence, come to a conclusion. A judge doesn't say, well, it could be this, it could be that. A jury doesn't say it could be 50-50. They say, here's what the evidence shows, and they're able to say that. Same with a doctor. When the doctor is diagnosing you, you don't want the doctor to come in with a preconception that it must be this, and not actually look at the actual medical evidence. You want the doctor to be open-minded and look at the totality of the evidence and come to a diagnosis and make the best diagnosis he or she can. And that's objectivity. I believe in the same kind of objectivity with regard to journalism. And but once we've come to a conclusion based on real research, genuine research, we should tell people what we found directly.
And let me ask you, sort of along that line, but I'm kind of curious your opinion about opinion journalism. Opinion drives the internet. People go on the internet to look at opinions, and you in an old-fashioned newspaper, which I'm used to, a print paper, we kind of knew where the op-ed page was versus the front page. On the internet, it's sometimes a little bit harder to find because the analysis pieces, the opinion pieces are sometimes mixed in there on that homepage. I mean, do you think that's a problem or not? Yeah.
I think it is a problem. I mean, I think that even in the old days when we had just a print newspaper and there were editorials, the public, notwithstanding what we said about the separation between which was not always the case, but mostly the case in the United States, where the opinion side is handled separately from the news side, people didn't believe it. That's so. But and now on a website, they're adjacent to each other. They're both on the front, essentially what constitutes the front page, the home page. They both have relatively equal prominence on the page. And so I think people are having a really difficult time sorting out what's opinion and what's regular news coverage. But there's a bigger issue too, and that is that what we've been talking about all the time and that is that even just plain factual reporting, people don't accept that as fact, as objective fact. They view that as your opinion. So if somebody happens to believe that the election was stolen, when they see a story that says that it's absolute fact, that the election was legitimate, that Joe Biden actually won the presidential election, they view that as your opinion. And they themselves can't make a distinction between what constitutes opinion and objective fact. And so it goes well beyond and far deeper than, whether things are mixed up on the website. It's whether things are mixed up in people's heads. And they are mixed up in people's heads.
Yeah, and I've got a couple of reader questions coming in here, which I'll try to get to here because we got a little bit of time left. One is a reader asking a question saying, to what do you attribute Donald Trump's animus towards the press? And I would just kind of add my own little question on the back of that. I mean, didn't the press kind of make Donald Trump? So what do you attribute this kind of animus?
Well, I mean, look, I mean, he played the press before he ever entered politics. I mean, he cultivated the press in a big way, and he was used to very, sort of adulatory reporting, and frankly, not very penetrating reporting at the time. It would have been nice if the press back then did a more thorough job. There were some who did, and there were some books written about Donald Trump that were revelatory, but it would have been nice if the general press did a better job on Donald Trump way back then. What accounts for his animus? His animus is simply this: is that if you're not 100% in your corner, you're an enemy. And it's not even. You could be 95% in his corner, and he would still view you as an enemy. Look at how he's treated any member of the Republican Party who disagreed with him on any subject whatsoever. If you take issue with him, then you are on the other team. So look at Fox. I mean, as soon as Fox called Arizona for Joe Biden, Fox was in the doghouse. I mean, he was urging everybody to switch from Fox to OAN and Newsmax. And because of something that they did that happened to turn out to be factual, Joe Biden did win Arizona. And maybe they made their projection a little early, certainly earlier than others did. But in any event, I mean, it's just if you contradict him on any subject whatsoever, he views you as disloyal and an enemy. And so his animus is simply because the press is not supposed to be in his corner. It's not supposed to be at war with him either. It's supposed to be an ally of facts and truth. And so if you're an ally of facts and truth, when you have a president who is lying so much, he's obviously going to have an animus toward you.
And I've got a question here from FCC member Alejandro Reyes, who was saying the Washington Post has been expanding abroad. Do you think this is a sign of the revival of American news coverage? I think one example might be here in Hong Kong. There's a Washington Post bureau here now.
Yeah, the Post now has more foreign correspondents than it ever has had in the history of the Washington Post. I'm very pleased by that. We just set up, we had this in our budget before I left, and we started to set it up, and they've now, I believe, filling or have filled almost all the positions. hubs in London and one in Seoul. Those will be responsible for sort of covering news around the world and also domestically in the United States when other people are sleeping. And we have added foreign correspondents, and we're adding a foreign correspondent. I keep saying we, as if it were the present tense.
I still say that.
I know the Post has added a foreign correspondent in Sydney, and it's added a correspondent in Bogota. And so that's great. And I hope that continues. I think I'm very pleased that we were able to expand our foreign coverage to the point where there are now more foreign correspondents at the Post than there ever have been in the history of the news organization.
Yeah, I think it's fantastic personally. And I've got a question from FCC board member Eric Wishart, who asked about he says, well, Marty, you were replaced as executive editor by Sally Busby. And what do you think about the status of women in U.S. newsrooms, and particularly at the top of U.S. newsrooms?
I haven't seen the latest data. I mean, I know at the Post, I think more than 50% of the staff is women at this point. The last numbers, as I recall. Certainly at the top of the Post, if you look at the top 5 positions, 4 of them are currently held by women. I would say at the Post, it's a promising outlook. Obviously, more needs to be done. More needs to be done in terms of race and ethnicity as well, where we did not do as well. But in terms of women at the Post, it's a pretty positive picture.
Oh, great. And let me ask you just before we wrap up about book writing. You're writing a book now. Tell us about the process of it. Tell us what the book's going to be about. Tell us what do you do every day when you get up now?
I get on Zoom sessions like this. No. Well, I'm starting on a book. It's called Collision of Power, Trump, Bezos, and the Washington Post, which you stole that line for the title of this session.
I did.
And it's about Trump, Bezos, and the Washington Post. And so it's centered on my 8 years at the Post, all of the different kinds of things that we dealt with, from the transformation of the Post, under the sale of the Post, the transformation of the Post under Bezos, our encounters with the president, like Donald Trump, and his conflicts with us, with our owner, many of the issues that emerged over the course of 8 years at the Post, that I think are some of which we touched on here, and also some look back at some of the other stories that I did that had relevance and resonance in the present day. That would be the 2000 presidential election, when I was editor of the Miami Herald. Also the Elian Gonzalez case, which was a case when I was the editor of the Miami Herald, which involved significant ethnic tensions in the city of Miami, and the Catholic Church investigation, which has relevance in terms of what I see as a core mission of news organizations, which is to challenge power. So that's, which is something that we did during the administration of Donald Trump in various ways as well. So that's kind of the broad outline of the book. And so I work on that every day, and it's a process. I'm making progress, thankfully. But there's a long way to go, and it's not coming out. It's not a rush job, so it's not coming out immediately. So okay, I'm not on a super tight deadline.
Well, if there's a movie made about the battle between the Washington Post and Donald Trump last year in office there, would you like Liv Schreiber to play the part of you, and did you like your depiction in Spotlight?
Liev Schreiber is a really talented actor. I doubt that he wants to play me again. If he had the opportunity, there got to be other things for him to do. I would not be disappointed if he wanted to do that. I don't anticipate such a movie exactly, but Yeah, I mean, look, I was happy with what he did. I think that he had a difficult person to play, me. I don't emote that much, and so that can be difficult for an actor to play someone who doesn't really emote, at least publicly. And so and the way that the thing was written that I had absolutely no sense of humor. I'm pleased to say that good friends of mine, attest that I do have a sense of humor. So I'm really, they remain even better friends for having said that. And so, but at that particular time, I don't think I evinced much of a sense of humor because it was an unbelievably serious time. The attacks of 9/11 were 6 weeks after I got there. We had the anthrax attacks, as you recall, and we were embarked on this church investigation. And so, and the church was the most powerful institution in New England at the time. And so it was pretty serious time. And I was new to Boston and viewed as an outsider, if not a carpetbagger. And so that was, it was a difficult, and I didn't know anybody in town or at the paper. And that was a difficult time, or hardly anybody. And so that was really difficult.
Well, last question before I let you go. What books are you reading when you're not writing your own that you can recommend to us?
The books I'm reading or rereading are books that are relevant for the book that I'm writing. So I have a long list of books that needs to be, there they all are. They're just stacking up that I need to read. And I'm just finishing up The Apprentice, which was a book by Greg Miller about the Russia investigation. And I reread our book called Trump Revealed, which I mentioned previously in the remarks, which was a look at the biography of Donald Trump. I reread Dark Mirror, which is by Bart Gellman, about Edward Snowden and the NSA surveillance story, which was the first big story that we did after I arrived at the Post. And somehow it's been forgotten. And with Donald Trump, huge, most sensitive, most highly classified documents in the U.S. government, and with significant risks of publication when we published it. And so I'm continuing on that path. I'll be reading. I'll be reading the Phil Rucker Carol Lennick book. I'm sure I Alone Can Fix It. I'll be reading a variety of other books and about that I'm going to need for the book that I'm working on.
Well, thank you very much, Marty Baron, former executive editor of the Washington Post, my boss for 2 weeks before I left the Washington Post, and soon to be best-selling author. So thank you very much for joining us. We really look forward to it. Thanks all for joining. Please stay tuned to fcchk.org for our upcoming events. Thank you again, Marty Baron. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you, Keith. Thanks to all of you. Appreciate it.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.